Hello and welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about a pretty interesting board. As you saw in the intro, it's knobs on knobs on knobs. I am a 75% knobbed enjoyer, but this takes things to the next level. While this is not a 75%, this does give you the option for 4 knobs on the nav cluster. So this is the first Skyloong board that I've actually taken a look at. This was provided to me by WhatGeek, and they're the ones that I partnered with to bring you the other board that we looked at, the other 98%. And you can check that video out. I'll put a card in the top up here. But this one is a new offering that they are carrying. I know that other companies carry this as well, and I'm looking forward to taking a look at this because extreme knob boards are just kind of crazy to me, and like concept. So why don't we go ahead and take a peep at the packaging here. So there's not a whole lot going to it. Seems to be fairly basic in nature. Now, as I get into this, I do want to let you know that, again, this was provided by WhatGeek. This board will run you about $195, but if you use code PUNKSHOE, you'll get an additional 10% off. And you'll also help me make a little extra coin for the channel to keep videos like this coming. Now, the one that I got, we got all kinds of stuff here. We got, not exactly sure what that is. But all kinds of goodies here. Basic assembly instructions. Here's the different akin key functions. And we'll have to get that translated to English to be able to go through the RGB modes. But yeah, they give you all kinds of little, it looks like guide goodies and things like that. Now, what kind of other bonuses do we get here? Looks like, so an aviator style cable. That's pretty cool. I think this is actually one of the first times I've actually received a board that I have purchased or been sent for review that actually includes an aviator connector. Not a huge fan of them, but I think that's a pretty nice inclusion. We get some of the spare keycaps for this build. And by some, I mean all of the extra keycaps for this build. Got a couple of extra switches here, which we'll take a look at in here in a moment. Keycap switch puller. Looks like some extra screws in case we need it. Oh, nice. It's a USB-A to USB-C. That's pretty nice. Some extra stabilizers, and so we got the polycarbonate plate. So they send you this thing so you can do split space bar if you want to, which I'm not going to run on a full size. And then it looks like we've got 2 extra knobs in here. So all kinds of little goodies. Let's take out the board. All right, that's pretty cool. We get a nice little dust cover. I don't use these personally, but I think they can absolutely come in handy for somebody who, you know, leaves this on their desk and they want to cover it up. And this one actually fits really well too. So this is kind of a neat inclusion. I feel like they're more for like protecting the board in transit, but I do think it's pretty nice to have these in case you want to use them. I have so many boards that they just go on display and they get rotated out, and I clean them on a regular basis. So here we go. You see, you got your 4 knobs, got your numpad here, and then this is the blue board with the blue and pink colorway. Now again, if you want to use these keycaps with a different build, they do send a ton of little extras here. So that is pretty cool that you get all that. And it looks like, I mean, with this, you could even do like a 40% with it. This is a 3U 2.75U. So yeah, you get all kinds of little goodies here. All right, so this is an 1800 layout. So essentially you've got a cutoff numpad here that's been kind of squished. We've smashed our arrow keys over into the main alpha cluster here. We do still retain some navs. So if you remember on the other board that we took a look at was the VN96, I believe. It had a big old knob up in the right hand corner and it made our navs all kind of funky. So this board ships with 4 knobs. I'm going to tell you right now, ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to swap out these knobs, and we're going to put some navs here, and then we'll put 1 knob here. And I think that will be ideal. But I am curious to see what those 4 different knobs can do, because in keyboards, you know, it's one of those things where it's not like an Elgato or something like that, where there's integration with apps and things like that. You've actually, like, usually this will be volume up, volume down. It'll be like media controls. Another thing can be like side scrolling, up and down scrolling, things like that. So something that we definitely take a look at. So again, this is the blue version. I did get it with the polycarbonate plate. And if we flip it over here, we can see that it is an aluminum top, but we do get a polycarbonate bottom. And the reason we get a polycarbonate bottom is because this particular board is USB 2.4 gigahertz capable, as well as Bluetooth. So that is kind of a cool feature that we get with this board. We do get that aluminum top and polycarbonate bottom. And now I am a little bit of a fan of aluminum top, polycarbonate bottom. I will be completely honest. But we're going to be taking a look at this. We'll pop it apart, and we'll take a look at what is on the inside and what makes it tick. So what I'd like to do now is, why don't we go ahead and go to a top-down view, so that way we can really start taking this apart and get into it and really see what makes it tick and see if there's any sort of mods that are necessary. I don't feel there will be, because let's be honest, a lot of new boards that are coming out, especially in this price range, do have a lot of case muting inclusions. And I do believe that this has PE foam, it has silicone plate dampening, and it also has some sort of foam dampening in the case itself. So why don't we go ahead and do a top down, and we'll take this PCB out and we'll take a look and see what makes things tick. All right, here we are. We've got our GK980 Plus, and it's looking pretty nice out of the box, honestly. So we've got screws somewhere here. So looks like we've got a couple screws here, and they are Phillips. I'm going to use our XOOL toolkit here. Again, we'll have that linked in the description. And it looks like there's magnets or something that connect it. So what we'll do is we'll take out these 2 screws, and then we will pop this out. All right, now that we've got those 2 screws out, let's see if it just lifts off. Sure enough, it just pops right out. Now, what I am concerned about is, it does look like we are going to have to pop these knobs off. All right, so it looks like the easiest way to do it is to just simply apply some force here and lift up, and then it will pop your 4 knobs off. And then we've got these 4 little guys right here, which are blockers, and they screw on from the underside. So we'll have to remove those if we want to replace these with switches. Now, that was one of the things that I was kind of, I wouldn't say concerned about, but interested in seeing, is I want to pull these guys out and take a look at them. So they did give us 2 extra knobs. We've got these 4 here. Grab these extra knobs real quick. All right, so we've got these extra knobs. They are a more rounded traditional style knob, and that's what we'll be using in place of the delete key. All right, so what I want to do is I want to pop one of these knobs off here. They seem to come out just like a normal switch. Let's see if we can't get that to focus. So it's like a normal switch, almost like a low profile switch. It's got these little pegs here that transfer the conductivity. So they kind of bounce up and down, which is really cool. We see that in other types of products. The knob is different. You see here the encoder is included, like it's a little plastic thing, so be careful with those, inside of like this plastic shroud. So that is very interesting. It's the same form factor as a switch bottom. In that bottom housing, we've got north-facing sockets, which I'm curious about the rest of the board, if it's going to be north-facing or not. We've got the north-facing sockets, but then we've got those 4 pegs for connectivity for the the actual encoder. So that's actually, you know, as much as I would like to say, you know, budget boards and this and that, this is actually a pretty innovative design to include a new type of encoder that can function from a hot swap perspective. That's pretty dang neat. So these are Glacier Rose switches. I'm not really sure if you can buy these individually from the WhatGeek website, but I'll post a link to another website where you can pick these up individually. These are a 65 gram bottom out medium tactile in a polycarbonate housing. These are the Glacier Rose switches. So these are actually pretty decent. After checking out the Betty and EMT switches, the Betty switches were the tactile ones by Haimu. And I do believe that these are Haimu's as well, because they do have these little holes in the bottom that allow for lubricant drainage. However, these do not appear to be factory lubricated, but they are quite smooth. The only downside I would say is they're not, you know, polycarbonate is not my favorite housing material. But still, nonetheless, these are pretty decent feeling. They are, they honestly don't feel like a 65 gram bottom out. But, you know, we'll pop these guys in here and see what they feel like. Now, before I go taking that step, I'm gonna pop out one of these middle switches here. Now, looking at the PCB here, it doesn't appear that there's any kind of PE foam in there at all. So there's no PE foam, but if you look closely, there is some silicone dampening in there. So let's go ahead and remove this whole assembly and see what we got for our plate dampening. Now this is interesting. So there is like a little thing here that allows for it to, the magnet to sit on. So we've got several magnets in here, and one of them actually pulled out because the magnetism was so strong. So that's interesting. So yeah, there's 4 magnets in the top here or in the front, and then those 2 screws that hold in the back. There is a screw holding it here. So it does look like we are tray mounted. That is very curious. Let me go through this board, pull out the tray mount screws, and then we'll get into it. All right, so we've got all these keycaps removed and these screws pulled out. So if you want to disassemble this to do any kind of modifications inside the case, you're going to need to remove 3 screws throughout here. So 1, 2, 3. In addition to that, you'll need to pop off these keycaps here and here to remove 4, 5. And then down here, 6, 7, 8. And then you'll need to remove this piece right here so that way it'll come apart. So it's at 10 switches or screws rather. One thing I will say that's kind of nice, I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not. It does have a little O-ring around it, which is kind of thoughtful. I mean, they kind of tried to isolate it, but I highly doubt that they got the bottom of it correct. All right, so when we pop this apart, we've got a lot of JSTs. So it looks like we've got a JST connector on the right here, battery connector down at the bottom, and then another JST connector on the left. So it seems pretty straightforward. The sockets are north facing, which is kind of a bummer. I thought I had seen that the 980 was not north facing, that it was south facing. There's some silicone, so the silicone sheet that does the dampening does have a thin layer that goes over the spacebar, I guess, to provide some spacebar dampening, but it does not provide any sort of underswitch dampening. So I think what we'll do is we will, at very minimum, do a dual layer tape mod on this. But yeah, it is straight up tray mounted. We've got a nice big old battery right here. It says that it is 4,000 milliamp hours. And the muting foam is, well, it's what you would expect, I guess. So I think what we'll do is I'll put a 3mm thick sheet of neoprene in it to give us that more thocky sound, if you will. So why don't we come back after we've got the tape mod and the neoprene in here, and we'll put it all back together and see what it sounds like. All right, so I've gone ahead and added the 3mm sheet of neoprene, and I'm not going to do the tape mod because this presses up pretty hard against the back of the PCB, which will provide a tape mod like feel and sound to the board. What I do is I basically lay it out flat, and then I'll cut a slot across where the standoff is, and then I'll press down and get the foam over top of that standoff. And then we cut some slots for the cables, and we slide the cables through. So why don't I go ahead and get this assembled and get those keycaps swapped out, or those switches swapped out. We'll get the board back together, and then we'll talk a little bit about the overall build experience before we go into a sound test. All right, we got it all back together, and a couple things that I want to mention before we go over the build process. I do want to mention that there is a channel for your USB cable, so you can have it go left, right, center. The plug is actually right here, so it'll run through the channel and into here. We do have riser feet, which help depending on your environment and how you like your typing angle. I know that the sound will change based on how you have it positioned on the desk. So how was the overall build process? I don't not like it, but I will say it was a bit of a headache. The fact that you have to remove all these individual blockers for these switches was kind of a pain. I mean, it wasn't a pain, but it was just extra steps. And then we had to move one over to here, and then the whole confusion about like how does a knob come off. There's no clear indicator that there are magnets that hold this guy together back here. So that is something of concern. The fact that there are so many screws to put it together is kind of a pain in the butt. And in addition to that, it is kind of nice that they added to the O-rings to it to kind of isolate the plate, but it's kind of a moot point when you've got a plastic plate. So maybe the FR4 version is the way to go. But yeah, the build process was getting the top off and getting into it was easy. I don't think the 3mm sheet was the way to go. I think maybe a 1.5mm sheet and some tape mod would have been better, but I just don't get what I find to be a desirable sound profile from it. And since we're speaking of that, why don't we go ahead and do a sound test, and I'll see you guys on the other side to kind of talk a little bit about that and talk about my final thoughts on the board. Okay then, so there you have it. What did you guys think about that? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this board too as we wrap up here. So a couple things to talk about here. So like this is what we're getting from the alphas. The stock stabilizers they're okay. They are plate mounted and they are lubricated, which is nice. But you know, with any plate mount stab, it leaves a little something to be desired. Now, this is my cream soda switch, and I think that really hits different. I think a nylon on this polycarbonate or an ink material would actually work really, really well and make this sound a little bit more thocky, which is where I feel like this is targeting, is the individuals who like the, thock. The board overall, the keycaps, solid. These are very much MDA profile, I think. And I've been using those a bit on my QK65. And I don't know, like, I really enjoy these wider profiles because I feel like they deliver a certain style of sound that I prefer. but they also kind of maintain that cherry height, which again, I prefer when I'm gaming and things like that. I prefer a higher profile when I'm just enjoying typing and taking a break from gaming. But these keycaps are nice. The fact that you get the extra kitting is nice. That is a pretty incredible value in and of itself. As far as the switches, I think they have a good tactile feel, but I do not enjoy the way that they sound. That's not to say that you couldn't get a better sound, or it might be your sound preference, but you could try a couple different things. Like, I think what would be ideal for this would be some IXPE sheet over the PCB, and you'll just have to make those cutouts for the rotary encoders. In addition to that, I think a thinner layer of foam, and I think you would have a pretty nice board at that point in terms of sound profile, especially. Yeah, I mean, if you're cool with these switches. Now, this board does it is available in a bare bones if you want to hunt that down and maybe pick yourself up some cream sodas or melodies or runners, something like that, to kind of give a more cleaner, higher end sound profile if you want to go that far with it. Now, let's talk about the missed marks here. Price point. This guy is $195. For $195, I know that this is an in-stock board, but you can get a Zoom TKL. The Zoom full size will be coming out. You can get a QK75. You can get a QK. I believe there's the TKL is coming out too. So it's just one of those things where this price point has a lot of competition, and the fact that you get a polycarbonate bottom, which I know polycarb is kind of high right now in terms of material costs. You do get tri-mode, which is nice, but I don't feel like this is competitive. And I'll tell you why. Because the price point could be lower if we didn't have this garbage. And I'm just going to call it out as I see it, man. Like, why? I mean, this right here adds material cost. Material cost equals higher MSRP. Why not just include the single knob, the single cap, and allow you to move it, or just make it here? The Keychron, the Keychron Q3 has a knob here. It's going to run you about the same price. It's a full size. Or sorry, no, it's a TKL. Sorry, but anyway, it'll run you about the same price, but they don't do all that, right? Like, and you get G Pro switches and all that too. So I know it's kind of a toss-up, right? I guess this is meant to compete with like a Keychron product or an Akko product, but honestly, I feel like this could have been more competitive at like the $160, $170 price point, and then these vendor discounts, you know, the 10% off codes. So again, you're looking at $195 and then 10% off, so about $20 off. Brings it to $170. I guess it is kind of competitive, but it puts it right in line with the Keychron product. But like this is just unnecessary material costs here. So this could easily, by removing these material costs, they could easily drop the price point $5 to $10. I mean, and these special rotary encoders, you know that these were not, you know, cheap. I mean, cheap by relative standards, but in terms of comparison to switches, this probably costs a little bit more to produce than a switch. And then you've got, you know, the extra screws that are needed for it. You know, all of this is added cost. And while it might be just pennies on the dollar or whatever, it is added cost. It does increase MSRP. I do feel like if the price point was a bit lower, this would be more competitive. But in perspective of like a Keychron product, if you are looking for an alternative, you want a tri-mode aluminum top, I'd say this is, you know, if you're open to a Keychron product, this is probably in line with that. Value sentiments are fine, to say the least. So, I don't know. It's a pretty decent board. Again, not my favorite sound profile, but I really do like the feel of these tactile switches. I think if you were to fully disassemble and lube the rails on these switches, they would be very nice. I do like the single rotary encoder here. I would rather have the F13 be my delete because that's just how I run my boards. But the nice thing is you can have that single knob anywhere on this nav cluster. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's a pretty good board, especially if you consider the 10% off. I think it does come in line with a Keychron product, and I can recommend it at that price point, you know, especially if you can get some sort of discounted or free shipping on it. Because I know if you buy a Keychron, you're looking at either local vendor markup, or if you order direct from them, you're looking at like $30 shipping. So I think it's a pretty good win in my book. It's fine, you know. It's nothing. It's not the M1 that is this insane steal of a deal in terms of what is being offered, but I think you get a lot for what you're paying here. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, whether this appeals to you or not. Yeah, I think that's about it. I think that's all I got to say about it. So thank you guys as always for hanging out. It's been fun, very interesting. We don't normally do full OEM built boards here, so it's pretty nice to take a look at these every once in a while. And I've got a couple other ones that are coming in too. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to hang out with me. And I know this is a little bit longer video, especially for something that's OEM. I might take a look at this again and do a switch swap and throw some cream sodas in here just for giggles. And maybe look at some alternate stabilizers as well. And see if we can't get something that sounds a little bit better and kind of elevates it a little bit. So we'll see where that goes. So again, thank you for hanging out. I hope you guys had a great new year. I hope you guys have a great year going forward. But until next time, y'all have a good one.